I remember meeting with you guys a few months before you launched GeekWire. We met at the Fremont,
The Red Door.
the Red Door, and you previewed the idea that you had the idea that the name would be GeekWire and all that. So we had that
And you were like,
conversation.
guys, come up with another idea.
Yeah, it sounded like I think I said something like, "Oh, it sounds like word perfect." So, yeah, no, this has been a very long journey.
It
I think I
has.
was on your. I think John interviewed me for the previous.
Yes.
I always forgot what was that
Tech Flash.
Tech Flash. That's right. Yeah.
Brad Smith, when we told him what the name of the new site was, he's like, how many synonyms can you come up with for tech and news?
That's great.
Welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. My guest today is Hanson Hosein, an Emmy award-winning journalist, filmmaker, and communication strategist who has spent his career exploring how we understand the world in times of change. He's the director of the new documentary American Dignity, a powerful short film that traces the legacy of the civil rights movement from Seattle to Selma and Virginia to Washington, D.C., exploring what it means for today's divided America. Hanson began his career as a correspondent for NBC News, reporting from conflict zones in the Middle East and the Balkans. He later founded the Communication Leadership Program at the University of Washington and became an early advocate for digital storytelling, helping organizations and individuals adapt to new ways of reaching audiences. We'll talk about the film and how he made it, and also about the state of media, the impact of AI, and what it means to create and communicate and develop community in a world being shaped by powerful new technologies. Hanson, it's great to see you.
It's so great to see you and hear from you, Todd, and have you in my little domain here in my shed north of Seattle.
Exactly. So I want to start there, and we've got a long history together of talking and being on podcasts and collaborating and sort of comparing notes. But first, tell us where we are. And if you would, could you give us a bit of an audio tour for people who can't see this amazing space that we're in?
So during the pandemic, we lived in Seattle for a very long time, pretty close to the University of Washington where I work. But during the pandemic, we realized we wanted something a little bit more self-contained for the kids. And we found this property that had a large amount of land, a smaller house, and we decided to move up there. And as we were renovating, we didn't actually plan for a space for me. And so after we were done the renovation, I said, wait a minute, I don't have anything. And now on the property, in addition to the pickleball court, there's a chicken coop. And the chicken coop looked like the great space, but I didn't know how to get rid of it until a tree fell on it during a windstorm a few months later, and I got insurance money.
Perfect.
So I went to Home Depot, figured out what size I wanted for the shed. And then because we'd done the renovation of the house, we had all the great suppliers and contractors. So I got drywall and electrical, and we have amazing internet. And I put acoustic insulation in it, plus landscaping. So it's this self-contained studio that I can play music as loud as I want. I have surround sound and Atmos. I've got my mics for recording my soundtracks for my films. I can edit in here. I do a lot of work with clients on Zoom using podcasts. I've done a lot of work with Microsoft from here. So it's a self-contained studio shed that used to be a chicken coop. And to give you the audio tour, I'm a big sort of analog media person, despite being a digital media guy. I've got films, a lot of science fiction. I've got, thousands of albums, both vinyl and high resolution CD. I've got my little fridge full of sparkling water. I've got my guitar. I've got mics everywhere so I can do my voice and record music and soundtracks for my film. And I've got the big screen so I can just monitor everything. So that's it. It's just this unusual thing that works very well for me. And it has a unique acoustical identity to it because no other place sounds like it. And it's probably got me seasoned all through it because I spent so much time in here working.
I'm sitting in the chair. It's kind of a chair of honor where you normally work, and it's kind of a captain's chair.
Yeah, you could see it on the bridge of the Enterprise, right? And I decided not to do a big desk with a typical chair. I wanted to have something that it looked like I was flying the ship. And so when I do these things on camera, people see exactly where I'm at, and the chair frames me. It's got these black leather wings that surround your head and shoulders. So yeah, it's part of the shtick.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. So before we get into the details of American Dignity, your new short documentary, I want to get a sense for how the technology of media production has evolved for you. One of the reasons why I was inspired to reach out to you, and I've been thinking about this for a few months now, actually, since I saw your post showing the pack that you took to the inauguration in Washington, D.C. as part of the making of this film. And it was far less than what I brought here to record this podcast with you. Walk me through your days of reporting in the Middle East, what you would have with you, and how the production worked there, and how the technology has evolved now to the point where you're making this documentary as a one-person producer, director, filmmaker.
Well, I'll tell you what hasn't changed, first of all, is that one of the reasons why I was so attracted to becoming a one-person storyteller 25 years ago was because I wanted agency over the story that I wanted to tell, right? And because I worked for NBC News for a long time when we were doing Voice of God stuff, and you were very much constrained by both the business model as well as the narrative model. And I was just in New York last week and just got to revisit some of my NBC haunts and NBC colleagues. And I realized how important it was for me back in 2001 to break away from all of that. I was determined to be able to have this independence to tell a different kind of story. Now, back then, as you can imagine, this is before iPhone. This was before cell phones could even record video. I think it was the BlackBerry reigned supreme. And so then you were looking at a standard definition digital tape into a Sony handheld camera, and you would edit it on a laptop. And then I would, if I was in the field, like in Iraq or wherever else, I'd have to send the finished story in a very compressed form through a satellite telephone to New York to be with. So it was really hard. But I understood what it meant to sort of really do these things very quickly, but also how to compress it. And so I love that constraint. And I've taken that constraint with me as I started to make films. And even now in the most recent documentary, it's not about perfection. It's not about studio beauty. It's not about HBO excellence. It's about getting the story right, fast, and on your terms. And on your terms means you don't have to wait for an editor or somebody else to do something. I don't have to wait for the soundtrack. I'll make the soundtrack. I don't have to wait for it to clean up the sound. I use AI in my editing suite, right? I don't have to have a camera person to go with me because you need to have a steady shot as you're crossing a bridge or at inauguration. I've got a DJI Pocket 3 that's got a little gimbal on it. It shoots wonderfully. So that's what's changed in terms of giving you even more functionality in a smaller space. But what hasn't changed, and which is what I championed from the beginning, and that's why I created that graduate program, is that we all have now this unique facility to tell powerful individual stories without waiting for permission.
So inspiring. I mean, like, you are preaching to the choir. I am about to start, saying amen from over here. I mean, this is the thing that just captivates me about the era that we're entering. For me, I started in newspapers when there were people literally over in the other room cutting and pasting pieces of paper onto flats. And to see where we are now with the age of AI and the individual empowerment, it's just really remarkable. At the same time, we've been talking about this a lot on the podcast recently, John and I and others. It can be overwhelming, not in terms of learning the technology, because to me, that's just kind of fun, but in terms of the doors that it opens and all of the possibilities that it creates. And so I'm curious, given all of those potential opportunities, how do you end up choosing the projects you work on? And specifically, how did you end up choosing American Dignity to be the film that you would make?
Well, even when I taught classes in storytelling at the University of Washington, I was a big fan of establishing early on the power of creative constraints. The idea is that if you do have the possibility of doing anything, whether it's technology that's facilitating it or AI or a new platform, that's the worst thing that could happen. It's like having an unlimited budget for a movie. The worst movies are the ones with the biggest budgets because they think they can do everything.
Right.
Like Lord of the Rings, the first movie in Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship, was probably the best because they had the least amount of money they used. And then after they got more and more successful, they threw more money at it. And then you got The Hobbit, which is terrible. So
it's like the tech companies.
That's right.
They have
the
the
more
initial
money
breakout hit, and then they think they're doing great.
You see it with Netflix and Apple TV and they have huge budgets and they put absolute crap together. And so I'm a big fan of the constraint of time and budget because it forces you to get really to the heart of the creativity that you're trying to do, the essence of the story. And so that's what I start with first. What is the essence of this story that we're trying to create? And then go with that, because otherwise you can get caught in this real maze of trying to multiple directions. So to me, that's really important. The way I see AI really helping, beyond using it as a thought partner, I even used AI back and forth before I went to inauguration in January, because I knew what the security constraints are going to be. I knew how cold it was going to be. I said, here's all my technology. How am I going to be able to capture this and not get nabbed by security or have something fail on me and get the resolution? So that helped. But what I could do today that I couldn't even done 3 years ago is shoot audio and video in really trying circumstances, like in a massive crowd in Washington, D.C., or crossing a really noisy bridge in Selma, Alabama, without having a sound engineer with me. And then coming back to my studio and being able to use AI to clean up audio that would not have been usable otherwise. So that's amazing to me. So it's given me much more power and much more freedom to put myself in more challenging production situations and be able to capture the story.
That's incredible. Okay, so that leads into the film American Dignity, and I want to talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire. We are on location from north of Seattle, the woods, and Hanson Hosein's very special shed, and we're happy to be here.
I call it the chicken coop.
The chicken coop, exactly. And we will be right back.
I'm Brian Westbrook with GeekWire Studios. On this episode of Money Hacks presented by BECU, we chat with Stacy Black, BECU lead financial educator, and answer your financial questions. Stacy, one of the questions that came up is managing miscellaneous expenses. You have a tip specifically for streaming services.
I go through and list all my subscriptions, streaming services. I take a look at my bank account and see what's coming out and make sure I remember everything, or my credit card statement, and list them all out and the amounts. Then you want to evaluate what you're really using. I'm not using all of the streaming services, and in fact, I forgot about one that I signed up for, right? So this is going to give us a clear accounting of what we have and what we're using.
This is a great idea to save money on those miscellaneous expenses. We'll also talk about living paycheck to paycheck, how to buy a home, and whether your financial plan is working for you. Take a look at all of the episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU.
Find more information at becu.org. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop from GeekWire. I'm talking with Hanson Hosein this week. He is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and filmmaker, and his new film is the short documentary, American Dignity. Hanson, I watched this film. I was lucky enough to get a screening of it on my computer, and it's really remarkable. And it tells the story of Charles Douglas III, who's a young voting rights organizer from the Seattle area. So I'm sure there's the connection right there. And he goes out and seeks wisdom from Charles Malden, who's a civil rights veteran who was sixth in line during the historic 1965 Bloody Sunday March across Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it's really remarkable, the story that you tell about Charles Douglas's quest to learn from and kind of reckon with the aftermath of Selma long term.
And the aftermath of the presidential election of 2024.
Where he was canvassing in Virginia related to voting. Was that before or
That
after?
was the first election after the presidential election. But Charles Douglas from Common Power was so convinced that the Democrats were going to win that he was doing podcasts right up to the election, saying it was going to be a huge victory. And then it didn't happen. And that was really interesting to me from a storytelling point of view. And so, I've done documentaries before when I was younger where I felt like I had more of the cerebral story first, and I pursued that. This time I wanted it to be an emotional story first, and then the big idea would follow with it. So the big idea is obviously, how do we lead today, given the outcome politically of what's happening in the United States, and how do we connect it to the civil rights movement? But the small idea was very much kind of like Star Wars, like Luke Skywalker is going back to speak to Yoda to figure out how to move forward, right? And so
I love that.
And in Star Wars, what is Star Wars? If you take all the science fiction stuff out of it and all the sort of the Joseph Campbell storytelling inspiration, it's really a family story. It's about a dad's gone wrong and the kids got to figure out how to sort it out, and they're being traumatized by their dad, right? It's like Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Leia. And so in this situation, this is very much a family story. Charles Douglas, his dad, was a Black Panther and essentially programmed him to do this kind of work. Charles Malden, his parents couldn't vote because he lived in Jim Crow, Alabama. And he thought as a 17-year-old that he needed to do something about that, which is incredibly inspiring. So to me, these are acts of leadership, but they're affected by motivation by their families. And I wanted to be universally interesting as a story, whether or not you agreed with the premise or the politics. And so it's that's it. Now, how the film came about is really interesting because it's not because Charles Douglas is from Seattle. It's because I worked at the University of Washington for 15 years, and my chair for most of that was David Domke, who ended up leaving the university at the same time that I did. But he left because he wanted to create an organization that really did look at voting rights and civil rights, and he created this organization called Common Power. So we lost touch for 2 years.
Okay.
And then he reached out to me a few years ago and said, "Hey, what you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing this, this, and this." I said, "Come on a tour with us and check out what we're doing in the South." So I went. I'm not a political person, but I went anyway. And I just fell in love with what they were doing in Selma. Some their donors had bought this beautiful newspaper building right next to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they were renovating it. And I felt like a bolt of lightning had hit me and said, "That's incredible. That's investing in a poor town that changed the world but never got its just due." And they said, "Well, do you want to play a role in this?" And I said, "Sure." And so we said, we need somebody to advise us on the renovation from a tech and storytelling point of view. Plus, there's these veterans of the Voting Rights Act March who are getting older, who want to figure out how to lead and to teach younger generations how to do it. So I came on as a bit of an advisor to try to understand how to do that. So I did that for a little bit and got to know the area really well. I've been to Selma 10 or 15 times. And then in December, after the election, I had two burning questions. One, does the civil rights movement even matter anymore? I mean, younger generations don't seem to understand what Selma was about. It's been superseded by Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all the other things. Why are we still telling those stories? Is it like just for baby boomers? And secondly, Charles Douglas, who inherited Common Power from David Domke, really believes in going door to door, but everybody said after the election that didn't make a difference. So you've got these people who are meant to inspire the world, who have done the really great work, and did it really hit a brick wall in November 2024? So those are the two questions I wanted to answer as a storyteller. And for some reason, there are some people who thought that was a great documentary to pursue, and I got a little bit of funding. On December 31st, 2024, it got greenlit. So we're sitting here in June 2025, 6 months since the film was greenlit, so at the end of December. I shot it all in 3 weeks in January. I edited it in February, and I brought it to Selma to premiere on Bloody Sunday, the 60th anniversary in March. So that's the backstory, but it's also the miracle of the technology that allows me to turn things around that quickly. I treat it like a breaking news documentary. I thought there was a really powerful story to tell that was of this moment, even though it was looking backwards as well.
So incredible. So you've said, I know, that there's still a role for this, not long form, but short form sit down film in the age of YouTube. I know that's one of the things that is important to you. Why is that important to you? And how do you see this kind of content fitting into the larger frame of the content that so many of us are consuming on our phones?
I just watched this great episode on John Oliver's show about AI slop. And I love that term, AI slop, because it just sort of, there's so much mediocrity out there to begin with from a content point of view, and AI is just adding to the mediocrity. And so even, I started podcasting in 2004 when it was invented. And I'm on a lot of podcasts like this one. I have hosted podcasts. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. Yeah. I feel like I want, when it comes to content, I want superb, excellent content that has been edited, curated, and really put together that sort of values my time. And so when it comes to making a film, we can give stuff away all the time, right? But I want it to be so good that it could be nominated for an Oscar. I want it to be so good that people would pay attention to. I want it to be so good that it'd be better than anything AI could create. And I think that's where we are as content creators today. Yes, we feel like we're being overwhelmed by the technology and that AI can do a lot of what we as creatives can do. And that just forces us to step up and do even better. So I wanted to prove that with this short documentary that I could create something excellent that would still be worth watching, that I was not going to throw immediately into the open source sort of Creative Commons and say, hey, watch it on YouTube and get 300 views. I wanted to do something different with it.
I know one of the things that you're still trying to do is to get an Oscar nomination for this
Which is
film.
ridiculous.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I mean, it would be ridiculous if you didn't have such a methodical plan. Can you explain what you've been doing to get this even in a position where it could be considered for an Oscar nomination?
Yeah, and the Oscar nomination is kind of like, I don't know, it's like, it's that point on the horizon that forces me. Once again, it's a creative constraint. It's got to be so good that I have to think that I can actually get it there. And so that it's a great motivating factor. So to get an Oscar nomination for a documentary, short documentary, any film, normally you have to, there's two ways. First, it's either to enter into a qualifying film festival, such as the Toronto International Film Festival, for example, or Sundance, and for it to win as a category. Once it wins one of these qualifying film festivals, it automatically is eligible for consideration for nomination. It's not nominated immediately. That's a hard road to go down, because first you have to get into the film festival, then you have to win, and the film festivals are usually later in the year. And as we know, headlines are just continuing to overwhelm anything that's going on right now, especially because there is some Trump-related content in the film. And so the other way to do it, which felt like we could accelerate things, is that it has to play for a week, once a day, in one of 6 markets in the United States in a movie theater that people would pay to go see, which is crazy because it's a 20-minute film. But we found a way to get it into independent movie theater in LA and then one in New York City, and it's played for a week in both of those places. And I now have the letter saying I can now submit this to the Oscars for consideration.
I love that during the most recent Academy Awards, you had your family actualize and visualize
that we would be there next year. And then I watched the short doc that won in my category. I said, I could do better than that. So that's what sort of made me feel it's not such a flight of fancy.
It made me think, what could I have my family actualize?
I don't know, mansions, BMWs.
I want them to actualize this chicken coop.
Oh, well, yeah. I can help you with that without committing any kind of insurance fraud.
All right. I want to talk a little bit more about the film and your process and the Oscar nomination, the future potential Oscar nomination after this. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. I'm reconnecting this week with Hanson Hosein. And Hanson, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but you, in fact, were the first guest on the GeekWire podcast. And for people who listened to our anniversary show a few weeks ago, you'll know the distinction I'm making there. This podcast started initially under a different brand with a different news organization, and we count that as the beginning. But then when we started GeekWire and we restarted the podcast, you were the person that both John and I felt comfortable bringing in because we knew we would have a great conversation with you. And 13 years, 14 years later, that hasn't changed. I've been looking forward to this catch up for quite a while. And I appreciate you letting me bring mics to.
Well, I consider it a badge of honor to be number one, and to even at this point in my career or whatever I've got left, to still be relevant enough to be on your podcast.
So here's my question, though. Why does an Oscar nomination matter in this world? Why is that important to you?
It matters primarily because it is a signal from the whatever institutions are left that it's a piece of quality content. The other reason why it matters is because as you introduced me in this podcast, you said Emmy Award winning. And I won that Emmy when I was still at NBC News 1999, right? And so that is a credential and a badge of credibility that still matters. Sadly, it still has to be the headline on my LinkedIn things. That's what people care about. And so I want to do it again. I want to ring that bell again, but this time really on my own terms. You know, I got Seattle's Most Influential. I have a Telly Award for stuff that I created, but winning that Emmy was through the machine of NBC News. And so I still feel that had a bit of an assist. And I want this on my own terms for a story that I created, that I saw through from beginning to end. And then this is the ridiculous thing, because I haven't said this to anybody, at least publicly. You've heard of the expression EGOT.
Yes.
So it's an acronym for Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony.
Yeah.
if I can get an Oscar, then I'm going to try to figure out how to get a Grammy and a Tony. And it probably is going to involve AI and writing a screenplay and doing the music for it and somehow being like Elton John.
I love it. I love it. We're like in the ground zero for that with your guitar over here over my right shoulder.
That's how they figure out how to write a screenplay.
This is great. Yeah, I keep looking around this space, not to go down this rabbit hole, but like as we were walking in, I was asking if you needed any borders.
It's
like BOARD.
The only thing it doesn't have is a bathroom, but it's got you can use the woods next door. But yeah, I've got photos I've taken at concerts like Paul McCartney and Rush, and then there's Miami up there with the wings that have been broken. And so, yeah, it's meant to remind me that I am actually a pretty capable media creator. There's pictures of Bill Clinton and Hosni Mubarak because I was at King Hussein of Jordan's funeral, and I was up close enough to take those pictures. So it just sort of shows where I've been, and that I'd like to think I'm not quite over the hill yet. And I know that sounds sort of self-deprecating, but I'm constantly concerned that, especially as a storyteller and a creative, that just not hitting the mark anymore or not relevant, especially as things move so fast. And so it's really important to me to maintain this beginner's mind, but still also go forward with the confidence that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I hear that as a healthy motivation to continue to improve yourself and to embrace the current realities of the day and reinvent yourself within them. And that really resonates with me.
It's absolutely crucial, because if you stick to the old business plan, and there was a great article in the New York Times a few weeks ago about how Gen X stuck to their creative path and now they're out to, they've been pushed out, right? And I feel like that's something that is constantly a threat. So for me, my approach, other than creating stuff, is that you constantly have to put yourself on the front lines. And the front lines means danger, risk, change. I was on the front lines in wars as a journalist. Today, going to inauguration or putting my reputation on the line to tell a story that's a little bit unusual, that's important. The Seattle Kraken invited me a few weeks ago to speak to them about how to communicate in this time. I said, you have to behave like you're in a war zone. It's the fog of war. Things are changed. You cannot tell what's going on. It's really dangerous and really risky. But you've got to, on behalf of your constituents, your stakeholders, your audience, make sense of it somehow for them. You've got to help them make decisions in a trusted way as much as possible, and you have to align with the values that matter most to your community. So to me, that's what I do. I want to continue to be on the front lines, because we're all on the front lines now, and that means that I'm not hanging back or I'm not going into retirement. I'm still putting myself out there. It's dangerous. It's not that lucrative, but the idea is that you see things that other people can't see.
I'm curious, given your history of journalism in the Middle East, how are you taking in content about the war between Israel and Iran? And the AP yesterday just said it was okay to call it a war.
Thank goodness. I was wondering what took them so long. You can't be attacking each other's capital cities and not call it a war.
Yeah. So that war, and then I guess the conflict in Gaza still. How are you taking in and absorbing that news, given your own history producing it from that same region of the world?
Yeah, I was based in Israel for almost 4 years and went to Gaza and the territories several times, and I was in Iraq obviously a lot of times, and Syria and Lebanon. And so what I don't do is start with headlines in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal.
Really?
Yeah, I find I'm not a big fan of the New York Times anymore. I find I know that they're seeing the world through a different perspective than I am. I need the raw material as opposed to what I think is more and more opinion and synthesis going through there. And so there's an organization based here in Seattle called Factal, F-A-C-T-A-L. Corey Bergman, another old journalist started it, and I'm an advisor to them. And so because of that, I get their service for free. And it is a beautiful, raw, immediate feed of headlines. They get it from the most unusual places, but it comes through faster than CNN or NBC or the Times gets it. And so because I was a journalist who lived there, I can see the most basic information coming through about rockets, attacks, whatever, and I understand in my mind what's really happening. So I'm writing the article in my head as opposed to waiting for some journalist in the New York Times to write the article. That's how I make sense of it now.
I think you're in a unique position in that regard.
I know. So I knew when, for example, that Iran was hitting a U.S. base a couple days ago, I could tell that was performative. So normally people would panic at that headline, but I can tell when there's some people are sort of going through the motions because they have to.
and I sort of walked over your spelling out of their name. It's Factal.
That's
and,
right.
As you mentioned, Corey Bergman and Charlie Tillinghast.
That's right. Who's former as MSNBC they're running it, and it's subscribed to mostly by chief information security officers from banks and intelligence units and any or nonprofits that are in dangerous places, so they can have the most relevant information as soon as possible. And when I travel, even when I was in New York, it automatically detects that I'm in New York, so I start getting alerts about that, which is extremely helpful.
It's interesting. We've talked with them in the past, and it strikes me, have they launched some sort of consumer product, or are they still very much enterprise?
They're still
oriented?
enterprise, but if you have a nonprofit,
Yeah.
you can get a version of their service for free. And it's amazing. It's amazing. So I start with that, and then I get a whole bunch of other headlines through various newsletters or Apple News. And so that's what I do. I don't read one particular source exhaustively.
That's really interesting. And to me, your comment about the raw material really resonates, because I, as a reporter, have started to treat my own job so much more skewed toward the information gathering now that I know the synthesis is going to be that much more efficient. And as a result, I'm going out and gathering more and more information than I ever would have, because in the past, I wouldn't have had time to sift through it.
So you're saying the synthesis will be done by AI?
To some extent, it will be assisted by AI,
Right.
for sure. And things like Notebook LM and ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and the analogy. And, I wrestle with this. I actually feel a little self-conscious when I'm at an event now and people see what I'm doing, like looking over my shoulder, because the mentality I'm bringing to reporting, just in my own basic way, I'm not in the Middle East for sure, but is I'm the general contractor. I supply the raw materials. I lay out the blueprint. I determine what goes where and when things happen. I bring in an inspector in terms of a third AI agent or AI engine. I like Gemini currently as my fact checker.
I agree.
But I don't have to pound every nail or hang every sheet of drywall. And that's the way I look at it. And I know I'm a little bit on the edge in that regard. How are you thinking about creation, co-creation with AI, when something is still yours? And
I love the way you describe your own work and how you're doing it. And I would argue general contractor sounds fine, but I would say, given how long you've been doing this, and I'm feeling this myself as well, is that we have reflexes now to be able to read a situation very quickly and understand what's going on. So, for example, the Middle East, right? You have the same reflexes for when you see a tech headline, for example. So I would suggest that maybe you're a general contractor, but you're also the architect. And the architect understands the big picture and the design and can do it very quickly and can see where the flaws are and where the strengths are and where the innovation is. And you can only do that because you have had so much experience of getting it right and wrong sometimes, so it leads you to that direction. And so that's where I see myself now. AI, I've been using AI for about 3 or 4 years. I even testified to the workforce committee for the Washington State Legislature back in 2022 or 23 with Rovi Brannon from Continuum College, University of Washington. So I was an early adopter. I understand it, but I also still feel it's pattern recognition, which means it's looking backwards all the time, right? It's based on what other people have done or put into the system or what it's learned from that. And so for me, I'm still such an eclectic thinker. I'm trying to put things together that haven't been put together. And I know that my head moves quickly because I have seen enough that I can make sense of something better and quicker than AI can in terms of breaking news. And so, because I can connect those dots. And I don't like where AI does with that. I think AI is really good at taking bulk information and just compartmentalizing it for me, and that's how I use it. I use it as a thought partner. So if I'm, for example, going to the inauguration of Donald Trump, and I know that security and the weather is going to be hard, and I tell it what equipment I'm going to have, and I ask for it, how do I pack this? Am I going to get through with it? And what should be my approach to using it in that situation? That's helpful. It's very good at sort of looking slightly backwards and forwards. I look way forwards. I'm a 60,000 foot thinker.
Yeah. People in our generation have that luxury in that we were forced to learn to do it on our own. Yeah. And I wonder, as a former educator in particular, how you're thinking about that, not only for the college and graduate level people that you've worked with, but also for younger generations like our kids. How are they going to develop those skills to be in a position to use AI in an informed and experienced way without actually doing the hard work to begin with?
Yeah, I have two teenagers right now, and I've told them both, I don't care if you go to college, A, and B, I think it's really important that you pursue whatever you find joy in, because we don't know how this is all going to work out. And so it may be that AI takes away your job. It may be that you find a way through because we're still innovating on it. So my son might want to be a car mechanic, which he loves cars. My daughter's obsessed with medieval England. And so she might become an archaeologist, linguist. And I don't know how that works out, but just do that. And if you don't want a degree, that's fine. Because I think it's just very much when Google came about, it was no longer about what you need to know. It's about how you ask the questions. And because the knowledge is all there. Now that's being supercharged with AI. It remains how you ask the questions, but it's how you ask the questions and then how you interpret the answers.
Yeah.
Because we cannot trust the answers. But it really does. It's a wonderful shortcut. And so can you at least start with that, but really almost have a journalist mind and be very critical of what comes your way.
Yeah.
And I actually have 3 subscriptions to different AIs, and I ask the same question 3 times just to see what happens and who's more positive and who makes more stuff up. When I ask ChatGPT where I was born, it still says I was born in Montreal. I went to school in Montreal. I was not born in Montreal. So a very basic fact that's really out there is wrong.
This is a whole rabbit hole, but I don't understand why I can't. And if I could have 1 minute with Sam Altman, this would be my gripe. ChatGPT, through all of its iterations, through all of the different language models, fabricates direct quotes in quotation marks more reliably than it actually gets them right. It's wrong more often than it's right.
I think there's a line in there that says, be a sycophant. That's ChatGPT.
Well, yeah.
Make me feel good about being wrong.
Claude and Gemini, not that way in my experience.
No, I think they put a little more effort into it. But, ultimately, so when I look at AI and I think about myself as a creative and I think about my kids and younger generations, absolutely have to be well-versed in this so that it can power where they're going. And then we've got to figure out what is our competitive advantage as humans that still keep us relevant. But we're seeing it now. I've invited you to some of these conversations about the future of higher ed that we're doing at the University of Washington, and we just had a recent one where we know that the entry-level jobs, especially in communications, are going away. People don't need to hire for them if you can use AI for that. So what is there? The mid-tier. But how do you get to the mid-tier if you can't get the lower tier? And so ultimately, I think this is where I want to go, and this is what I advise a 20-something person if they come to me for job advice. It's like, I think you got to start your own company. You've got to figure out, what does AI allow you to do that would not have been possible before, that you can do with 1 to 3 people, that gives you global reach and still allows you to pay the bills. I think that's the best way forward.
So as I try to land this plane, Hanson...
Yeah, I'm sorry. You asked for it.
This is fantastic. No, I like this. This is the podcast I would listen to.
Audience of 1. Audience of 1.
What's next for you? And are there any big picture thoughts that you just really want to get across here on this episode that is kind of a reconnection that we haven't yet talked about?
So I mentioned that the thing that I love most about storytelling and the way I do it is to have agency over that. The thing that I've been most fixated on for a very long time, even when I was leading this graduate program at the University of Washington, is that I believe that we're going through this really seismic transition. This is before Trump and before AI, and that the world as we know it is going away, and we're going into a new world that we can't quite see. And so for me, what I've always wanted to do is to be able to equip people with the leadership skills and the ability to see, so that when everything falls apart, as it is now, and it truly is falling apart, what's it going to take for us to come together again, to trust each other and collaborate at scale to build, not to rebuild, but to build new institutions, new sacred stories that give us credibility and trust so that we can move forward. So for example, USAID, which barely exists anymore, was very much a product of World War II, right? And the Kennedy years and things like that. And that made all sense when we were trying to compete with the counter narrative of the Soviet Union. We don't have that anymore. And so what I want ultimately is to give people a new perspective on how to lead moving forward into uncertainty. So in my film American Dignity, there's this wonderful visual metaphor of crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And then you can't really see what's awaiting you on the other side, which then was a bunch of stormtroopers and Ku Klux Klan people, until you're 70% across the bridge.
Right.
But you still need to keep going. And so that's what I want. I want to take the ethos of that film, American Dignity, and I have this idea of we cross the bridge as a leadership mindset. And I'm thinking about doing a visual podcast crossing signature bridges around the world with leaders, talking to them about uncertainty and their values of their communities and how, what is their point of no return and what is it going to mean when they get to the other side? What do they build differently and do differently? I hate to give it all away because I haven't done it yet. I'm sure somebody's going to steal the idea. But that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how do we lead differently? How do we visualize that? How do we engage? And how do we do that beyond just two guys on a microphone, but actually visually doing it on a bridge?
Let me put in my vote for the Walt Whitman Bridge in Philadelphia.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
It's a great bridge. It sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's like to actually walk it. I actually don't know if I ever walked it. But just because it's named after Walt Whitman, I think that would be a good one.
That's a great one. So when I was in New York last week, I walked 5 bridges just to try it out, shooting, and I did it with a couple of people, and it's great. It's great to be walking because you see things and you feel like you're going from one place to the other. So you got the visual metaphor and you're talking to some interesting people, and I'm using that cool technology too.
But what about the noise? I guess.
But that's what I was telling you about. The AI is now so good in the microphones to begin with that I've got trains and people and cars and horns, and I can still hear the audio. And once I put it into my computer, and I'm using editing like DaVinci Resolve, and it's got incredible AI, you can't hear anything but pure sound of the people talking.
Incredible.
So I don't need to worry about that anymore. I'm using these tiny little wireless mics. So that's what I could not have done even 3 years ago.
So cool. All right, Hanson, I could just hang out. Seriously, you got an extra room?
And Todd, you are pride of place. It's like I'm honored to be your first on your podcast. I gave you my chair. I don't bring anybody into the studio. This is really just for me. So thank you for coming.
Hey, one last question. I can imagine that people hearing about this film might want to know, how can I see it apart from going to a theater in New York, perhaps? Will there come a time when it
now that I've got the screenings out of the way, what I'm trying to do right now is get a streaming deal so I can get it online. So I've applied to the New York Times OpDocs. My first 2 films are on Netflix, on Hulu. I don't think it'll get there, but I'm trying to find a place that it can be publicly that's not giving it away on YouTube. But it may end up on YouTube at some point. So for now, if you're really interested in seeing it, find a way to contact me and I'll send you the link and the password. I don't publicize. I don't make it easy to contact me, but people can find a way to contact me.
You got to put in the effort. Yeah. And you might get the
That's
reward.
right. If it's important enough to you, find me.
I love this. This is the new distribution approach.
That's a creative constraint.
Hanson Hosein, thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd. It was great.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Curt Milton edited this episode. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. We'll be back soon with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.